If someone told you that you could force your mind to learn anything you want, you would probably laugh. Or maybe you would roll your eyes, imagining some exaggerated internet guru promising superpowers. Or perhaps you would secretly wish it were true, hoping there was a switch inside your brain that, once turned on, would transform you into a learning machine. But what if the problem is not that this switch doesn't exist? What if the problem is that no one has ever shown you where to look for it? And what if Carl Sagan, with his calm voice and cosmic clarity, could point you in the right direction? Because here's the irony. The greatest obstacle to learning isn't that your mind refuses to be forced. It's that most people spend their lives pushing in the wrong direction. They treat the mind as if it were a rusty door that needs to be kicked open, when in reality, it behaves much more like a telescope, delicate, precise, and extremely powerful when aligned correctly. You don't force a telescope to show you the universe. You adjust it, you calibrate it, you aim it carefully, and then the cosmos reveals itself almost effortlessly. The mind is the same. It resists pressure, but it responds beautifully to alignment, meaning, intention, curiosity. Imagine for a moment that Carl Sagan is here, sitting across from you, with that gentle half-smile he had when speaking about the mysteries of existence. Imagine him leaning slightly closer and saying, "If you truly wish to learn anything, anything at all, you must first understand how your mind falls in love with ideas. Not how it memorizes them, not how it forces them in, but how it becomes fascinated, drawn in, almost hypnotized by the meaning behind them. Because meaning, not pressure, is what activates the deepest regions of the brain. And that is the secret no one tells you. But let's be honest, most of us were never taught to learn this way. We grew up believing that learning was a battlefield, one where we needed discipline, force, repetition, and a good amount of mental suffering. We pushed ourselves to memorize formulas, repeat definitions, highlight entire books, only to forget everything shortly after. And then we blamed ourselves, thinking we weren't smart enough, disciplined enough, capable enough. But what if the truth is far simpler and far kinder? What if the problem was never your mind, but the methods you were taught to use? This video will challenge something deep within you, the belief that learning is hard, painful, or reserved for certain types of people. It will flip that idea upside down, because the reality is that learning is a natural process, one the brain is literally built for, one that happens automatically when certain conditions are met, when curiosity is activated, when context is clear, when ideas connect, when you feel fascinated. The brain absorbs information the same way a star absorbs light, continuously, effortlessly, inevitably. So let me ask you something. When was the last time you genuinely enjoyed learning something? Not because you had to, not because someone expected you to, not because it was on your to-do list, but because the topic sparked something inside you, a little spark of mystery, a whisper of possibility, the sense that understanding this one thing might expand your world, even slightly. If it's been a long time, don't worry. Your mind didn't lose the ability. It simply fell asleep waiting for the right invitation. And by the end of this video, you will know exactly how to wake it up again. You're about to explore the principles Carl Sagan believed were essential for real knowledge. Not shallow memorization, but deep understanding. The kind that transforms the way you see the universe around you and the universe within yourself. Because learning, according to Sagan, was never just about information. It was about connection, curiosity, awe. And once you learn how to awaken those forces, your mind becomes unstoppable. So prepare yourself, because the next few minutes may change the way you think about thinking. They may show you that the ability to learn anything isn't a miracle or a talent or a gift. It's a method, a structure, a mindset, and it begins right now. Most people spend their entire lives believing that learning is an act of force, that the mind is some stubborn machine that needs discipline, repetition, pressure, and even a little pain in order to function. This belief is so widespread that it feels almost instinctive, as if struggling to learn were part of being human. But what if this struggle is artificial? What if the mind was never designed to work under force, and the only reason learning feels difficult is because we keep trying to make the brain operate in a way it fundamentally rejects? Think about it. The human brain is the most complex structure known in the universe. Billions of neurons, trillions of connections. a system capable of creating art, solving equations, and imagining galaxies billions of light years away. It thrives on patterns, emotions, curiosity, and meaning. It seeks understanding because understanding helps us survive. But when we try to learn something by pressuring the mind, by forcing memorization or punishing ourselves with repetition, the brain interprets that pressure as stress, and stress shuts down the very systems we need for learning. It's like trying to start a fire by pouring water on it. Carl Sagan understood this deeply. He often spoke about how the mind expands naturally when it encounters wonder, but closes itself when threatened or bored. That is why he used metaphors, stories, and cosmic imagery, not because they were poetic, but because they activated something ancient in the human mind, something that makes learning effortless. He wasn't simplifying science. He was unlocking the way science can speak to the heart. Now consider how most of us were taught in school. Memorize this, repeat that. Don't ask questions. Don't explore. Don't get curious. Stay inside the system. We learn to fear mistakes even though mistakes are the foundation of learning. We learn to chase grades, even though grades measure performance, not understanding. We learn to decorate notebooks instead of decorating our minds with ideas. And worst of all, we learned that if something is difficult to memorize, then it must be our fault. As if intelligence were a rigid trait instead of a dynamic process shaped by emotion, context, and curiosity. This creates a problem. When you believe that learning requires force, you stop trusting the natural mechanisms of your own mind. You start thinking you need tricks, hacks, shortcuts, or superhuman discipline. You become someone who tries to push information into the brain instead of inviting the brain to come alive. And the more you push, the more the mind resists. Because resistance is not a flaw. It is a protective mechanism. The brain evolved to conserve energy, to avoid useless information, to reject what has no relevance or meaning. It is not being lazy. It is being efficient. Imagine trying to teach a cat to perform a trick by yelling at it. The louder you yell, the less it listens. But if you use curiosity, reward, and engagement, suddenly the cat becomes cooperative. The brain is not a cat, of course, but it behaves like one in surprising ways. It responds to emotional significance. It seeks novelty. It becomes alert when something matters. You cannot force it. You must attract it. So what does this mean for you, for the person trying to learn anything you desire? It means the problem was never that your mind isn't capable. It means you were simply using a strategy that contradicts human nature. The human mind is a meaning-making machine, not a memorization machine. When information is disconnected from meaning, the brain rejects it. When ideas feel empty, the brain forgets them. When learning feels like punishment, the brain shuts down the pathways responsible for retention and understanding. But when learning is connected to curiosity, relevance, imagination, emotional resonance, the brain becomes limitless. Think about the last time you became deeply fascinated by something. You probably spent hours researching it without anyone forcing you. You absorbed details effortlessly. You talked about it, thought about it, replayed it in your mind, not because someone told you to, but because your brain found meaning in it. That is the natural state of learning. Everything else is an artificial construct. In this video and in the next sections, you're going to learn how to return to that natural state, how to shift from force to fascination, how to work with your mind instead of against it. You will understand why your mind resists pressure, why curiosity is not optional but essential, and why every attempt to push information into the brain without context or emotional meaning is doomed to fail. You are not broken. Your mind is not flawed. Learning is not supposed to hurt. You simply need to learn in the way your brain was designed for, the way Carl Sagan would invite you to learn, through wonder, inquiry, and meaning. Curiosity is not a luxury. It is not a bonus feature of the human mind. It is not something that only a few gifted people are born with. Curiosity is the engine, the fundamental propulsion system, behind all forms of deep learning. And if there was one principle Carl Sagan repeated throughout his life, it was this: the universe reveals itself to those who ask questions. This is not poetry. It is cognitive science. Your brain is built to learn through curiosity, and when curiosity is present, learning becomes almost inevitable. Think about a child observing the world. They poke explore, taste, dismantle, observe, laugh, question, investigate. Their minds operate like small laboratories filled with experiments and hypotheses. No one forces a child to be curious. Curiosity is their default state. It is how the brain naturally expands its understanding of the world. But something tragic happens as we grow up. This instinctive curiosity is gradually suppressed by fear, by routine, by education systems that reward memorization instead of exploration. The result? A mind that forgets how to ignite its own learning process. Sagan understood that the key to retaining this childlike wonder was to never stop asking why. In his view, curiosity was not simply a tool to gather information. It was a way of relating to the cosmos itself. When he spoke about the universe, you could feel the fire of curiosity in every word. He didn't just want to explain facts. He wanted you to feel the same awe he felt while contemplating the vastness of the night sky. This emotional connection is what made people learn from him, not out of obligation, but out of fascination. And this fascination is precisely what modern neuroscience confirms. When you are curious, your brain releases dopamine, not just the chemical of pleasure, but the chemical of motivation, the chemical that lights up the circuits of memory retention, the chemical that transforms difficult ideas into inviting puzzles. Dopamine turns learning into an adventure rather than a chore. It tells the brain, pay attention, this matters, this is exciting. Once that spark is lit, the mind becomes incredibly receptive. Information sticks, connections form effortlessly, understanding deepens. But curiosity is not always automatic. In adults, it often needs to be reawakened. So how do you do that? How do you revive a force that has been buried under years of pressure, fear of failure, and boring learning methods? It begins with questions, simple, honest, childlike questions that cut through complexity and illuminate meaning. Sagan often said that there is nothing more intellectually powerful than a well-placed question. Questions create movement in the mind. They pull your attention forward. They open new mental pathways. A good question doesn't just seek an answer. It transforms the way you think. Imagine trying to learn a subject that feels overwhelming. Instead of forcing yourself to memorize it, try asking, why does this exist? What problem does it solve? How does it work beneath the surface? What is the simplest version of this idea? What would Sagan say about its place in the universe? These questions don't just clarify, they awaken curiosity. They turn the unknown into a mystery, and humans are hardwired to solve mysteries. Sagan also believed that curiosity deepened when ideas were connected to something emotionally meaningful. When you study astronomy, you are not just learning about stars, you are learning about your origins. When you study chemistry, you are learning about the elements that shaped your body. When you study history, you are learning the story of your ancestors. Meaning feeds curiosity, and curiosity feeds learning. This is why Sagan used metaphors constantly. He compared atoms to cosmic symphonies, evolution to a grand unfolding timeline, humanity to a way for the universe to know itself. These metaphors didn't simplify ideas. They made them alive. They sparked emotional resonance. And emotional resonance is the secret ingredient of long-term learning. So here is the truth. You cannot force your mind to learn, but you can ignite it. You can create the conditions where learning becomes natural, where the mind leans forward instead of pulling away. Curiosity transforms learning from an obligation into an instinct, from a burden into a desire. The universe is vast, complicated, mysterious, and yet deeply inviting. And your mind, when guided by curiosity, mirrors that same vastness. If you want to learn anything you desire, start by awakening the part of you that still looks at the world with wonder. The part that still believes every idea, no matter how small, holds a doorway to a larger understanding. Because curiosity is not just a tool, it is the flame that lights the entire path. There is a strange illusion that surrounds those who seem to learn with extraordinary depth. They look like they were born with some rare mental gift, some unusual capacity to understand anything they study. But if you examine these people closely, scientists, philosophers, great communicators, you will notice something interesting. Their brilliance doesn't come from consuming knowledge. It comes from explaining it. And this is the essence of the master's illusion. The idea that the fastest way to learn anything is to teach it, even before you fully understand it. Carl Sagan embodied this principle effortlessly. When he spoke about the cosmos, he did not simply recite information. He translated it. He took complex scientific concepts, star formation, the speed of light, quantum uncertainty, and wrapped them in metaphors so clear that you could almost see the ideas forming inside your mind. But here's the truth most people miss. Sagan didn't explain things well because he understood them deeply. He understood them deeply because he explained them well. Teaching forces the mind to confront its own illusions of understanding. When you read something, you often assume you got it. When you listen to a lecture, you feel like the ideas settled comfortably in your mind. But this is an illusion, a very convincing one. It's only when you try to explain the idea in your own words, without notes, without repeating memorized phrases, that the truth becomes clear. Either you understand the idea or you don't. There is no middle ground. Imagine learning a new concept, something intimidating, something dense. You study it, you read about it, you watch videos, and you think you've learned it. But try this exercise. Close the book, turn off the screen, sit in silence, and pretend you are teaching the concept to someone who knows nothing about it. Explain it simply, clearly, as if you were teaching a child. Suddenly you realize where the gaps are. You notice where your explanation collapses. You feel the parts you never truly grasped. The act of teaching exposes the cracks in your understanding, and once they are exposed, you can fix them. This technique transforms learning from passive intake into active construction. When you explain something, you reorganize the knowledge inside your brain. You build a mental structure rather than stacking disconnected facts. The mind prefers structure, meaning coherence, narrative. Teaching creates that structure. It forces you to connect ideas, create examples, simplify concepts, and form mental pathways that stick. Your brain loves this because it mirrors the way neural networks grow. Through connection, clarity, and repeated articulation, Sagan often said that if you cannot explain something in simple terms, it means you don't understand it well enough. This wasn't arrogance, it was a map. The universe is complicated, but the human mind seeks simplicity, order, meaning. When you teach, you are essentially translating the universe into the language of understanding, and that is what solidifies knowledge. But here's the secret. You don't need an audience. You don't need a student. You don't need a classroom. You can teach to an empty room, to a notebook, to a camera, to your own reflection in the mirror. The power lies not in who listens, but in the act itself. You can even write your explanations. This is just another form of teaching. What matters is that you externalize your understanding. You pull it out of your mind and reshape it into something clear and coherent. This technique is so powerful that entire scientific fields use it. Researchers teach their findings to colleagues because explaining reveals errors, assumptions, and areas that need refinement. Writers explain ideas in drafts because writing forces clarity. Mathematicians teach by proving because proofs expose hidden steps in logic. The act of teaching is a diagnostic tool. It shows you where your understanding is strong and where it is weak. And here is where the master's illusion becomes a superpower. The more you teach, the faster you learn. Knowledge stops being something you chase and becomes something you build. You're no longer a passive recipient of ideas. You become an architect of them. And once your mind shifts into this mode of construction, learning anything, absolutely anything, becomes achievable. So the next time you encounter a challenging topic, don't just study it, teach it. Explain it, translate it, break it down, transform it into something you could hand to someone younger than you, or someone older, and watch how your understanding strengthens with each attempt. Because the universe becomes clearer not when you force yourself to learn, but when you teach your mind how to illuminate the darkness. There is a reason complex subjects feel intimidating. Whether it's physics, philosophy, mathematics, neuroscience, or any deep intellectual pursuit, the mind recoils when it tries to grasp the entire structure at once. It feels overwhelming, heavy, impossible. But the truth is that complexity is an illusion, a kind of optical trick played on the mind. What we perceive as complex is simply something we have not yet broken into pieces small enough to understand. Carl Sagan understood this better than most. If you want to grasp the universe, you must first divide it into stars, planets, atoms, questions, and then assemble the pieces back together. This is the core of the cosmic puzzle method, the idea that any subject, no matter how dense or intimidating, becomes learnable the moment you break it into smaller, digestible components. When Sagan explained the cosmos, he did not throw the entire universe at his audience. That would feel impossible to comprehend. Instead, he would begin with a single question. What are we made of? Or, how did the first stars form? Or, what happens inside a supernova? Each question was a puzzle piece, and each puzzle piece, once understood, revealed another. Little by little, the vastness of the universe became a structured, coherent picture. Most people attempt to learn by swallowing the entire picture at once. They focus on the complexity instead of the components. They try to memorize instead of deconstruct, and because the brain hates confusion, they end up feeling frustrated, discouraged, and certain they are not good enough to understand the topic. But the problem was never intelligence. The problem was method. The human brain craves structure. It does not learn through raw information. It learns through patterns. When you break a subject into smaller pieces, ideas, questions, subtopics, the mind suddenly has something it can hold. Imagine trying to lift a massive stone. Impossible. But if you break the stone into small pieces, you can move them one by one. Knowledge works the same way. Learning becomes lighter the moment you divide the weight. Here's how this method works in practice. Let's say you want to learn astrophysics, or biology, or programming, or any difficult subject. Instead of asking, how can I learn all of this? Ask something like, what is the first principle behind this topic? What is the simplest piece of this puzzle? What problem does this field try to solve? Can I break this chapter into sub-ideas? What are the 3 most basic terms I need to understand before anything else? These questions fragment the complexity into manageable units. And once the pieces are separated, something magical happens. Understanding accelerates. Because learning is not about the quantity of information, but the clarity of each piece. This method also mirrors how scientists think. No astrophysicist tries to understand the entire cosmos in one step. They study specific behaviors, how light travels, how gravity bends space-time, how matter forms structures. Once the pieces are studied independently, they combine them into theories that model the universe. This is why scientific understanding feels solid. It is built piece by piece. Another essential aspect of the cosmic puzzle method is sequencing. It is not enough to break a subject into pieces. You must also arrange those pieces in the right order. If you try to learn advanced concepts before understanding the foundational ones, the mind will collapse under confusion. But if you build knowledge like a staircase, one clear step leading to another, learning becomes natural and even enjoyable. Sagan did this intuitively. He always started from the known and moved toward the unknown. He led the audience from Earth to the cosmos, from atoms to galaxies, from simple truths to profound mysteries. And here is something extraordinary. Every subject, no matter how intimidating, contains a gateway idea, one simple concept that unlocks everything else. For physics, it might be energy. For biology, evolution. For astronomy, light. For psychology, behavior. Once you find the gateway, the rest of the puzzle becomes easier to assemble. The mind needs an anchor, something solid from which it can expand outward. This anchor prevents cognitive overload and gives the brain a reference point for every new idea. When you learn using the cosmic puzzle method, complexity dissolves, confusion fades, and subjects that once appeared impossible begin to feel manageable, even exciting. Because what you're doing is aligning your learning with the way the universe itself is structured, from small to large, from simple to complex, from pieces to whole. This method does not just make learning easier, it makes it beautiful. It transforms knowledge into a constellation of ideas, each shining on its own, yet forming a coherent map when viewed together. So remember, if the universe can be understood piece by piece, so can anything you desire to learn. Break the world into puzzles, and watch the picture assemble itself. There is a moment in every learning journey when information stops being just information. It transforms, deepens, and becomes something more powerful, something almost untouchable. It becomes wisdom. Carl Sagan understood this better than most. He knew that the universe was not impressed by people queuing facts in their heads like dusty books on a forgotten shelf. Instead, the universe rewards those who know how to take those facts, stretch them, question them, apply them, and, above all, use them to see reality more clearly. In this section, we walk into the heart of what Sagan believed about knowledge, that learning is not the end but the beginning, that the true power of the mind comes not from memorizing the stars, but from understanding why they shine. Let's start with a provocative idea. Most people think learning ends, but in truth, learning only starts working when you use it. This is where many learners fail. They assume that collecting information automatically makes them smarter, more capable, or more prepared. But Carl Sagan would laugh, gently, kindly, but still laugh, at that assumption. To him, a mind packed with unused ideas is like a rocket that never launches. All potential, no movement. Wisdom, on the other hand, is the ignition. So the question becomes, how do you turn the knowledge you've worked so hard to acquire into something that moves, something that transforms your life? First, you need to actively apply what you learn. Knowledge that stays inside your head is just theory. Knowledge that touches your actions becomes power. Sagan believed the cosmos itself teaches us this lesson. Stars are made of matter that collapses and reacts and burns. They do something. They transform. Your learning must do the same. If you study astronomy, talk about it, teach it, experiment with it, use it. If you learn about psychology, test the theories, use them to understand your emotions, observe them in others. If you study science, apply its skepticism, its curiosity, its discipline, its honesty. Knowledge awakens only when applied, and that awakening is the spark that begins turning knowledge into wisdom. Second, wisdom requires reflection. Carl Sagan often said that science is not just a body of knowledge, but a way of thinking. And thinking, true thinking, requires pausing, examining, and questioning. When you learn something new, don't just accept it. Ask, what does this mean? How does this connect to what I already know? Why does this matter? What changes because of this? Reflection opens the space for meaning, and meaning is the foundation of wisdom. Without meaning, learning is hollow. With meaning, learning becomes alive. Third, wisdom grows when you confront your own ignorance. This is one of Sagan's most famous themes, the idea that acknowledging the limits of your knowledge is one of the greatest signs of intelligence. People fear not knowing, but Sagan embraced it. He saw ignorance not as a flaw but as fuel, a reminder that there is always more to explore. When you accept that you do not know everything, you become open to ideas, perspectives, and truths that others miss. You become flexible, adaptable, curious. And curiosity is not only the engine of learning, it is the engine of wisdom. Fourth, wisdom appears when you connect ideas across different areas of your life. Sagan mastered this. He connected physics with philosophy, astronomy with poetry, biology with ethics, and science with human emotion. This ability to synthesize, to take knowledge from one domain and use it to illuminate another, is one of the most powerful tools you can develop. When you combine ideas, you create insights. When you create insights, you create wisdom. Start noticing the connections between your experiences, your studies, your challenges, and your discoveries. The mind becomes wiser when it sees patterns where others see noise. Fifth, wisdom demands action aligned with understanding. It is not enough to know what is right, useful, or meaningful. You must act according to that knowledge. Wisdom is practical. It is visible in behavior. It is measured in choices. If you learn something profound about discipline, apply it tomorrow morning. If you discover something powerful about emotional control, test it in your next argument. If you understand something cosmic about the universe, let it shape the way you treat people, the way you set goals, the way you dream. Finally, Sagan believed that wisdom is humility, recognizing that every answer leads to new questions, every discovery leads to new mysteries, and every step forward reveals there is infinitely more ahead. Wisdom is not about being certain, it is about being open, not about appearing intelligent, but about becoming genuinely thoughtful, curious, and aware. If this idea resonates with you, if you want to not just learn but truly understand, comment below. I choose wisdom. Your engagement fuels the next chapters of this journey. There comes a moment in every journey of learning when the path divides. A moment when you must choose between becoming the same person you have always been, or stepping into a version of yourself that you have only imagined. Carl Sagan understood this crossroads deeply. He believed that every human mind carries within it a universe of possibilities, Yet most people never explore even a fraction of what they are capable of. They drift through life on autopilot, repeating the same thoughts, the same habits, the same fears, until the extraordinary potential of their mind fades quietly into the background. But then there are the others, the curious ones, the restless ones, the wanderers, the people who dare to reinvent themselves. This section is an invitation to become one of them. Reinventing your mind is not about starting over. It is about waking up. It is about noticing that your thoughts are not fixed, your abilities are not limited, and your future is not predetermined. Your mind is not a prison. It is a spacecraft, and like any spacecraft, it can remain idle on the launch pad, or it can ignite the engines and ascend into something greater. The choice is yours. Sagan believed profoundly in this choice. He believed in human agency, in the power of self-directed evolution, in the courage to reshape one's own cognition. But to reinvent your mind, you must first accept a truth that many people avoid. You are responsible for what your mind becomes. Responsibility might sound heavy, even intimidating, but in reality, it is liberating. The moment you take responsibility for your learning, for your curiosity, for your discipline, your entire life begins to shift. You stop waiting for inspiration and start creating it. You stop hoping for motivation and start engineering it. Reinvention begins not with a dramatic moment, but with a decision, a quiet, internal decision that says, I will no longer be the passive observer of my own mind. I will become its architect. Once you adopt this mindset, the transformation begins. But how do you reinvent your mind in a practical sense? You start by designing your internal environment. Every mind grows in the soil it is planted in. If the soil is full of distractions, doubts, and constant noise, your potential will never fully bloom. But if the soil is enriched with curiosity, structure, focus, and wonder, your mind will evolve. Sagan often reminded us that wonder is not childish. It is fuel. Allow yourself to be amazed. Let awe become part of your daily life. Read things that challenge your assumptions. Watch lectures that ignite your imagination. Surround yourself with ideas that expand your sense of what is possible. Reinvention is a byproduct of exposure. The more you expose your mind to meaningful stimuli, the more it evolves. Next, commit to intentional practice. A mind that is not exercised becomes sluggish. A mind that is challenged becomes sharp. Reinvention requires friction, mental friction. If something is difficult, good. Difficulty is the signal that your brain is forming new pathways. If something feels confusing, even better. Confusion is the birthplace of clarity. Lean into it. Do the hard things. Study subjects you once found intimidating. Ask questions that scare you. Pursue ideas that stretch your understanding. The universe rewards effort, and the mind rewards consistency. Then comes the most powerful step. Redefine your identity. The stories you tell yourself about who you are directly shape the limits of who you can become. If you say, I'm not smart enough, your mind obeys. If you say, I can't learn that, your mind complies. But if you decide, truly decide, that you are a learner, a thinker, a seeker, your mind will rise to the level of that identity. Sagan believed that identity and curiosity were inseparable, that the moment you identify as someone who is endlessly curious, you become someone capable of endless growth. Reinvention happens when your identity shifts from I can't to I'm becoming. Finally, understand that reinventing your mind is not a one-time transformation. It is a continuous, lifelong process. Just as the universe expands, your intellect can expand. Just as stars evolve, your ideas can evolve. Reinvention is not a destination. It is a direction. Every day you have a choice. To learn, to reflect, to question, to improve, to imagine. These small choices compound, and over time, they create a version of you that would astonish your past self. And this brings us back to the cosmic choice. The universe does not force you to grow. It simply offers the possibility. It lays the stars before you and waits. Your mind can remain what it is, or it can become something extraordinary. It can stay grounded, or it can launch. Sagan would tell you that the cosmos is open to those who dare to think boldly, question deeply, and learn endlessly. Reinvention is not reserved for the geniuses or the gifted. It is available to anyone who chooses it. If you are ready to reinvent your mind, To step into a new chapter of learning, curiosity, and cosmic awareness, type in the comments, "I choose to evolve." Let this be the moment you ignite your own mind's journey,